Okay, welcome. We have just completed the secret ending for Pathfinder Kingmaker, and this is the epilogue of the story. In the previous video, we already went through this one, so let's continue.
The kingdom built by our hero became an example for all its neighbors. What else would you expect? The stolen lands became the only place where the citizens sincerely toast the health of their ruler. The citizens lived trouble-free, and taxes made it to the treasury without losses. A powerful army guards the peace. Exploration of magic is on par. The temples are flooded with their congregations. And most importantly, our cultural contributions are at least the equal of Absalom. The stolen lands are called the land of popular rule, for in these lands, common people feel fully in control of their fates. Unfortunately, the total absence of authority allowed one of the richest regions in the kingdom to proclaim itself an independent republic, and retrieving those territories came at a rather high price for the king. Just half a year after the war with the First World, Gault moved its troops to the southern border of the kingdom. Their attack was rebuffed. The enemy state's infantry could do little against soldiers who were skilled with their swords and knew the military arts better than the alphabet. Since then, Gault hasn't risked crossing any borders again, fearing cruel retaliation for further insolence. How do you turn the stolen lands, savage and unruly, into a stronghold of safety and stability? The king found an answer by creating a police state. There are always some who are unhappy with the excessive interference advisors have in the citizens' lives, of course, but their protests are easily overlooked. The king became a true patron of fine crafts. Over time, the castle treasury filled with wonderful gifts from the best masters in the area. Armor, weapons, even magical artifacts, and the collection is still growing. The feud between Brevois North and South, which had been smoldering for ages, finally sparked the fires of civil war. Our troops lent aid to the forces of Restov, led by Sword Lord Jamandi Aldori. After several bloody battles, House Sertova was forced to recognize Restov's independence. The victory came at a high price, but we have no more loyal ally than once more free Rostland. Kasil Aldori, who lost an arm during the war, became a permanent ambassador of Rostland at our court.
So when I started this run, I had two primary purposes. Well, three if you include just finishing and winning. One of them was to do the Nyrissa romance, and the other one was to help Jamande and Rosland split from the rest of Brevois.
The Tiger Lords found it difficult to recuperate after what Armagh did to them. The barbarians remaining in Numeria weren't very happy that we sheltered the deposed chief and his supporters, but they were too afraid of him to attack us over it. That bomb has a long fuse, but it's definitely burning. I'm afraid that a few generations down the road, the grandchildren of the current Tiger Lords may want to retaliate against us for their grandfathers. Pitax almost returned to its former state, a joyful city filled with beers of dubious quality and deals of questionable legality. The old trade houses lost the crown, but they retrieved the property Iravetti had taken from them. Soon, Pitax became almost like a second capital in the kingdom, a thriving city through which rivers of money from across the region ran. Unfortunately, we get much less of this money than we would like. Governor Lyacenza turned out to be helpless against widespread embezzlement. Maestro Bellavara gave the Academy of the Arts a second wind. Throwing out mediocre students and sycophants, she gathered within its walls talented visionaries, rebels, and freethinkers. Those whose gifts felt cramped within the walls of more respectable institutions. She managed to do what Iravetti never could, namely make the Academy truly famous, albeit scandalously so. And so what if, instead of odes to the king, the Academy releases sneering pamphlets and revolutionary leaflets? It only helps his reputation as a true patron of the arts. The dangerous man-eating trolls disappeared entirely from the forests and swamps of the Stolen Lands. Kobolds, though, being sneaky and clever, are still sometimes met by travelers and hunters who wander off the beaten track. Some even say the short reptiles still praise the great King Tartuk, but no one knows for certain. As soon as anyone approaches the kobolds, they forget their military honor and turn tail.
I would say the best thing that I like about Last Islani mode is that it makes your decisions seem more important. When I went through this part, when I cleared the troll trouble, or I cleared the cave, I really wanted to give Tartuk the vassal state, so I wanted to accept them into my country as a vassal state. But Amiri and a Kundao and Jubilios pretty much just revolted. And based on that, I didn't want to lose any of those characters, so I decided to change my mind and it'll let me revise my decision. And so I made them, just banished them.
After enduring so many storms and troubles, Varnhold eventually turned into a real city. Daring settlers decided to conquer the vast, wild expanses of Dunsword, and despite all odds, they succeeded. The modest colony that almost vanished at the hands of an ancient lich turned everything around to become a thriving city with lively river trading. Magar Varn and his beloved, after distinguishing themselves in the battle for the kingdom, soon celebrated their wedding. Half the capital was invited, but they weren't ready to settle down and have already set off with another party of mercenaries. They've come to the aid of our kingdom on multiple occasions, but they're famous for their adventures in the most dangerous regions of Golarion, protecting peaceful towns from the undead and monsters. Agay, the Spriggan leader, learned a valuable lesson after surviving his meeting with the king and even regaining his tribe's home. Don't try to occupy seemingly empty settlements anymore. Instead, the Spriggans settled across Dunsword's wild borderlands and proclaimed it as their domain. Keeping the peace in a situation like that seems like the stuff of dreams, as evidenced by the occasional lost patrols and stolen cattle. The Sootscale kobolds think themselves the masters of the area around the Old Sycamore, and they aren't very friendly toward travelers. It hasn't come to bloodshed yet, but many careless travelers have broken an arm or a leg in the kobolds' traps. When the king visits, the kobolds usually calm down a bit and even take down their traps, but it never lasts long. Due to tumult on both sides of the border, Oleg's trading post gradually fell into desolation, regretfully leaving its walls, for which so much blood had been shed. Oleg and Svetlana left the backcountry that was so dear to their hearts and returned to the noise of the big city. Making sure her sister was safe, the former bandit Kressel traveled south. Her trail went cold somewhere in Absalom's docks. They say she changed her name again and now serves on a trade ship, hiding from old acquaintances. Jod remained loyal to the king to the end of his days, healing the sick and generously sharing his austere wisdom with anyone who wished to hear it, and some who didn't. Having fulfilled his duty to the ruler, Erastil's priest peacefully departed this world, surrounded by friends and disciples. Tisana, Lamashtu's priestess, didn't remain in the king's service for long. One night, she just disappeared from the castle and set off for the kingdom's borders, preaching to anyone who would listen and granting the needy the blessing of the Mother of Monsters. Having participated in Lamashtu's ritual, Olika gave birth to a strong and healthy baby. Sadly, the child grew into an unruly and violent adolescent. Having maimed a peer at just 10 years of age, the boy escaped to the Gnarl Marches, fleeing the rage of a mob that tore his mother to pieces instead. No one knows what happened to the lad, but legends of Lamashtu's child, who sometimes kills lost travelers and sometimes leads them to safety, are passed on by word of mouth throughout the area. The Fae took a fancy to the kingdom, feeling totally at home here. They often play various pranks, but they never do any serious harm. Falcos and Teresia managed to restore the magic forest. Once freed of the anger of the Scythe Tree, people returned to the abandoned village, and it became a haven of friendship between the Fae and ordinary people, just like old times. The lizard folk of the Longtail tribe returned to live on the shores of Candlemere, but they couldn't return to their ancient way of life. Living alongside people, the lizard folk adopted their behaviors, habits, and even religion. More and more of the Longtail tribe pray not to the spirits of their ancestors, but to Erastil or Gorum. They even began to forget their original language. I hope someone writes down their songs and legends before they all sink into oblivion. The goblins who put so much effort into preserving the king's lands obviously felt that gave them the right to do whatever they wanted in the kingdom. Travelers are careful to move in groups when they can, and any peasants who spot at least one particularly toothy stranger immediately raise the alarm. For if you see one goblin, there's likely a whole gang. A delegation of wizards from Absalom and other areas appeared in the kingdom one day, asking for permission to examine the lair of the Lich Farneris the Thoughtful. After completing their research, the wizards spent a long time thanking the king for freeing the world of that monster. In their opinion, he'd been capable of causing the end of the world, maybe even 2 worlds. The sweet teeth departed on a journey, hoping to see as many wonders as possible of this world and others. They keep sending us news from every corner of the map. Their bright painted wagon, drawn by a bull mastodon, crisscrosses Galarian, somehow appearing in the center of one incredible story after another. Evindra settled down in the Tuskwater and visits the capital often. She became a friend to the people of the kingdom, helping them and teaching them how to treat the lake life with care. Parents allow their children to swim in the Tuskwater at any time, day or night, secure in the knowledge that she'll look out for them. After Nyrisa's curse was lifted, the maimed face of the last defaced sister began healing, little by little. She still keeps her distance from people, but she's always glad to see the king. After the victory, the storyteller abandoned his affairs and began spending a lot of time alone in contemplation. He eventually bid farewell to the king and left his lands. But I suspect the inhabitants of Galarian haven't heard the last of this mysterious traveler, for his own story is hardly finished. The ancient artifacts gathered by the king built the foundation of a museum collection that has become famous even in far-off Absalom. Amiri remained a pariah to her native tribe, but she stayed close friends with Nylak, who ruled the Six Bears wisely and taught them to survive in the unfamiliar plains and cities. The restless barbarian would often travel for long stretches of time, but sooner or later she would always return to her old friends, bragging about new scars and recounting new feats, many of which Nylak immortalized in song. Valerie stayed to serve the king, and to this day she continues to be a muse to many people. Not just bards and admirers, but to warriors as well. Honest and resilient, Valerie is not just famous for her feats in battle, but also for her patience and kindness, which she says the king helped her discover within herself. Harren became famous, respected by dwarves throughout our kingdom as well as our neighbors, even as far as the Five Kings Mountains. He's often been asked to help out or teach others, and he's never denied anyone, despite his grumbling. Some people even listen to his preaching. Lucky for us, there's a lot less howling about the end of the world now, and more wise words of moderation and humility. Not all of his disciples turned to Grotus, but everyone took away something useful from his teachings. Jaethal spent some time at the king's court, but she then left to do whatever it was her new goddess required. She must have become a great inquisitor for Pharasma, as no one would know the ways of the undead and Urgathoa's cultists as well as a former undead cultist would. She was also seen in the company of Salim Godafar. It's unlikely the two became friends, being so different from one another, but it's a known fact that they worked together. Octavia didn't stay still for very long. Soon, she and Reg went to Numeria and started a huge slave rebellion there. They didn't manage to destroy the Technic League, but to this day, slaves speak their names with admiration, and slavers with terror. Over the course of their journey, the two grew as close as ever, leaving their quarrels and resentments behind. After returning from Numeria, Octavia settled in her mother's house and became the king's advisor and loyal companion. Rigangar left for Numeria with Octavia to start a slave rebellion. Over the journey, he really matured and learned to understand others, as well as how to control his anger. After he returned, he took a position in the king's court. Being both formidable and charming, he inspired fear in the hearts of some and lust in others. There are even some rumors that he almost talked Octavia into marrying him, and possibly even continuing the Della Fiorni line. Once the war was over, Tristan kept his promise to Sarenrae. In the middle of celebrating the king's victory, the priest suddenly disappeared in a flash of light, vanishing forever. I hope Sarenrae didn't take the Movonic Deva's memory, so her servant might still remember us and the stolen lands. Or if she did, I hope he was at least able to forget everything about the lands in which he endured so much suffering. After the war ended, Ekin hung up his bow on the wall and traded the path of the ranger in for the craft of the carpenter. It may not be the most heroic ending to a tragic story like his, but as Torag is my witness, Ekin's happy with it, as is Alina, who became his wife and is bearing his child. Any baby born into this family will be pretty lucky, since the king himself still visits his old friend and will likely become the child's patron. Jubilost returned to the life of a traveling explorer, frequently visiting his favorite kingdom. He said so himself. His famous work studying the First World all opened with a dedication to his longtime companion, the king. Another name was also mentioned, 2Z, my guide and inspiration. Admirers would ask Jubilost many times about this mystery lady, but he would only chuckle, hitch his knapsack on his shoulder, and return to storm the vast expanses of the First World once again. As for Knock Knock, apologies, I mean hero, knock knock, he continued his questionably heroic efforts in the Stolen Lands. Despite whatever mess he fell into, no matter the danger he leapt into, he always seemed to scrape through just a little better off than before. Like true heroes, he simply never gave up, struggling on and meeting the challenge of each new day with a spirit that no mishap or misfortune could ever quell. The slightly inaccurate statue of him and the king still stands in the square to this day. The two figures side by side. I've always felt that, while the heights may be a bit off, let's say, it accurately reflects the size and spirit of the goblin hero who'd been nurtured by the teachings of his king. Kalika remained in the kingdom, though her desire to witness the world's wonders keeps driving her to take long journeys. But when she is home, she spends much of her spare time with her sister. They don't quarrel anymore, and have stopped dragging each other into trouble. Kanera settled down in the capital and became a very busy entrepreneur. It seems as though every hour is planned, meeting with rich merchants or inventors whose work she's promoting. But on her way home, she never fails to stop at the market to personally buy some sweets for her sister. Between Kanera's business sense and Kalika's charm, they founded and successfully run not one, but 3 organizations: a trading house, a shelter for tiefling children, and a school of magic devoted to Nethys. Nyrissa and her beloved king live happily together, setting up the kingdom hand in hand. Their union somehow linked the unruliness of the First World with the order of material plane. Nyrissa managed to bring forth the daring vision for which she had once been cursed, the creation of her dream country. Our kingdom is now a flourishing land, taking the best of both wild nature and structured civilization, and our capital is an amazing garden city, which visitors from all over Galarian come to see. As for myself, the author of this book, Lindsay, who never chose a pretty nickname, I'm still here, inside my creation within the Capital Library. I live just like I always dreamed, surrounded by people and books, and not a day goes by without someone turning my pages. My story inspired many others to take up the quill. My readers have written many fierce books, articles, and pamphlets, flinging truth in the faces of tyrants. What more could I dream of? I hope, oh honored reader, that this story offered you some daring ideas, or at least some entertainment. In any case, it's time to set the final period.
Okay, that is one of many possible conclusions to Pathfinder Kingmaker. Thank you for joining me. Wrath of the Righteous is coming out in a couple weeks or so. I'm looking forward to that. I am intending to do a blind Last Aslanti run. Hopefully I'll make it to level 4. More likely I'll probably die at level 2 or level 3 or something like that. Alright, please join me again once Wrath of the Righteous is up. So long.